The Veltharan throne room was built to make visitors feel small. Ceilings soared 400 feet into a false sky projected with the light of a dying star, and pillars of black crystal hummed with old power, older than most species' written history. Every footstep on the polished floor echoed like a gunshot. Marcus Reyes had walked into worse places. A collapsed mining tunnel on Titan with the air running out. A burning transport ship over Ceres with 40 colonists screaming behind a jammed bulkhead door. A negotiation table with pirates who'd already killed 2 of his crews. But he had never walked into a room where 300 alien nobles turned to stare at him like he was something they'd found stuck to the bottom of a boot. Human. The word came from the throne itself, spoken by Queen Ashevra Kelnir of the Third Veltharan Dominion, and it dripped with a contempt so absolute it silenced the murmuring court instantly. You stand before me unescorted, unwashed, and unworthy, and you dare not kneel. Marcus had been on his feet for 19 hours. He'd flown a damaged shuttle through a debris field, walked 2 miles through corridors that smelled like ozone and unfamiliar spice, and been stripped of his sidearm by guards who looked like they wanted an excuse to use theirs on. He was, in fact, exhausted, filthy, and in absolutely no mood. With respect, Your Majesty, he said, I didn't come here to kneel. I came here because your border fleet fired on a civilian convoy in neutral space 3 days ago, killed 11 people, and your government hasn't returned a single diplomatic hail since. A ripple went through the court. Not outrage, but something closer to disbelieving amusement. The Veltharan were not used to being addressed. They were used to being worshipped, feared, or ignored. In that order of preference, Queen Ashevra rose from her throne. She was tall, even for her species, pale violet skin, catching the starlight from above, eyes the color of struck flint. She had ruled the Dominion for 80 years, and had, by all accounts humanity's intelligence services could gather, never lost a war, a negotiation, or an argument. You come into my court, she said, descending the dais step by step, a single unarmed creature from a species we have not even bothered to formally catalog, and you speak to me of respect. Do you know what you are, human? Marcus Reyes. Captain, Earth Defense Coalition Liaison Corps. You are a worthless peasant, she said it slowly, savoring each word, loud enough to carry to the farthest gallery. A grubbing, short-lived insect from a backwater rock, sent here because your leaders were too cowardly to come themselves. You are beneath the lowest servant in this hall. You are beneath the dust on my boots, and you will kneel, or you will be removed from my court in pieces small enough to fit through the disposal chute. The court laughed. Not everyone. A few of the older nobles, Marcus noticed, weren't laughing at all. They were watching him with something that looked almost like pity or caution. Marcus didn't kneel. He didn't move. Your Majesty, he said, I'd like to answer that, but you should probably know something first. And what is that, insect? You're about to make a very expensive mistake. The truth was, nobody in that room, not the queen, not her generals, not her spymasters who prided themselves on knowing everything about every species within 400 light-years, actually knew who Marcus Reyes was. They knew his name. They knew his rank. They knew he'd arrived on a modest diplomatic shuttle with Earth Defense Coalition mark, requesting an audience through the proper channels, dressed in a plain gray liaison uniform with no visible decorations. What they didn't know was that 6 years earlier, before the coalition existed, before Earth had ever made contact with a starfaring species, Marcus Reyes had been the last survivor of a colony ship called the Meridian's Hoax. The ship had been carrying 4,000 colonists to a system humanity hadn't yet named, running dark and silent, because early interstellar drives were unreliable and colony corporations didn't want competitors following their charts. Somewhere past the edge of the solar system, the Meridian's Hope had drifted into contested space belonging to a minor Veltharan border faction, not the Dominion itself, but a splinter group of raiders who answered to no crown and kept no record. They boarded the ship expecting easy prey, unarmed civilian, a cargo hold full of frozen embryos and terraforming equipment worth a fortune on the black market. What they found instead was 3,999 corpses within 6 hours, and one Chilovik, one man, who had grown up on a hard-scrabble asteroid belt fixing mining equipment, who knew every access panel and maintenance shaft on that ship better than the raiders knew their own boots, and who had spent those 6 hours turning the Meridian's Hope into a slaughterhouse for anyone who boarded it. He hadn't done it because he was a soldier. He wasn't, not yet. He'd done it because his little sister was in cryopod 447, and the raiders had started opening pods at random to check for anything valuable. And every seal they broke without proper protocol had a 12% chance of killing the colonist inside. By the time Earth Defense Coalition forces arrived, alerted by a beacon Marcus had rigged from scavenged parts, there were no raiders left alive on that ship. And Marcus Reyes was sitting in the airlock control room, with his sister's pod cradled against his chest, covered in blood that wasn't his, having not slept in 3 days. The Coalition classified the incident, partly to avoid panicking the public before humanity had even made its first confirmed alien contacts, partly because nobody wanted to explain how one untrained civilian had done more damage to a Veltharan raiding party than an armed response team could have managed. They gave him a quiet commendation, a liaison posting, and a warning. Never mention it unless it becomes strategically necessary. Marcus had kept that promise for 6 years. An expensive mistake? Queen Ashevra's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Explain yourself before my guards drag you out, human. 3 days ago, Marcus said, your border, the Keshrai Wing, ship registry markers, KR7 through KR12, intercepted a civilian convoy in what your own star charts mark as neutral space. They fired without warning. 11 dead. One of the ships they hit, the Halcyon Drift, was carrying colonists on the exact same route the Meridian's Hope took 6 years ago. I am not familiar with this Meridian's Hope, the Queen said, though something flickered behind her flint-colored eyes, a name half-remembered from an old intelligence briefing perhaps. You wouldn't be. It never made the news. A raiding faction attacked it. Killed nearly 4,000 people in 6 hours. Marcus kept his voice level. One person survived. He made sure the raiders didn't. A touching story. The Queen's mouth curled. I fail to see how a single peasant surviving a massacre concerns me, or excuses your insolence in my court. It concerns you, Marcus said, because I'm that survivor, and because, when I filed the incident report on the Halcyon Drift attacks, I recognized something in the sensor log, the energy signature of your Keshrai Wing's disruptor cannons. It's an exact match, down to the harmonic frequency, for the weapons carried by the raiding faction that killed my sister's convoy 6 years ago. The court had gone very quiet. Your border fleet isn't just failing to stop raiders. Your Majesty, Marcus continued, you're supplying them. Keshrai Wing ships are running weapons and ordnance to the same faction that's been raiding civilian shipping lanes along the Coalition border for the better part of a decade. Maybe you know, maybe you don't, but either way, that's what your unanswered diplomatic hails, and your unprovoked attack on a civilian convoy just confirmed for the 12 Earth Defense Coalition warships currently holding position at the edge of your outer systems. A noble near the front of the court, older, silver-eyed, wearing the black and gold sash of a war minister, stepped forward, alarm plain on his face. Your Majesty, if this is true, sit down, Minister Drask. The Queen didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on Marcus, and for the first time something other than contempt moved behind them. Calculation. You claim to be the sole survivor of a massacre carried out by my people's weapons. I don't claim it. I lived it. Marcus reached slowly into his jacket. Guards tensed, spears lowering, and produced a small data chip. Full sensor logs from the Halcyon Drift attack, cross-referenced with archived logs from the Meridian's Hope incident 6 years ago. Weapon signature, ship hull profiles matched against your Keshrai register, financial transfers from a shell account linked to your treasury to accounts controlled by the raiding faction. It's all there. Fabrications can be arranged by any competent enemy, the Queen said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. They can, Marcus agreed, which is why I didn't bring it as a threat. I brought it as a courtesy, because the Coalition already has this data. They've had it for 2 days. The only reason those 12 warships haven't opened fire on your outer colonies is because I asked for 48 hours to bring you the evidence in person and give you the chance to explain yourself before this becomes a war instead of a diplomatic incident. He let that sit in the vast, echoing silence of the throne room. You called me a worthless peasant, Your Majesty, Marcus said quietly, beneath the dust on your boots. Maybe that's true. I grew up fixing air scrubbers on a rock with no name. And I've never worn a crown or commanded an army. But I'm also the only reason there's a diplomatic option on the table right now, instead of a fleet of Coalition warships already burning through your atmospheres. You have about 40 hours left to decide which version of today you want to live in. Minister Drask was the first to move. He crossed the throne room floor and knelt, not before the Queen, but before Marcus, laying his ceremonial blade flat across his palms in the old gesture of formal apology. Captain Reyes. His voice carried through the silent hall. I served under the previous war minister when the Keshrai Wing's original charter was drafted. I raised concerns about their independence from Central Command years ago and was overruled. If what you say is true, this dishonor belongs to this court, and I offer my blade in acknowledgement of it. Queen Ashevra's jaw tightens. 80 years of unbroken rule, and she had never once seen her own war minister kneel to anyone but her, let alone to an alien she had, moments ago, ordered removed in pieces. Rise, minister, Marcus said. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to stop a war before it starts. Queen descended the final steps of her dais until she stood directly before him, close enough that Marcus could see the fine tremor in her hand. Not fear, he realized, but fury turned inward. The particular rage of a ruler discovering she had been made a fool of by her own court and her own assumption. You let me speak, she said slowly. Knowing what you carried, you let me call you worthless beneath my boots. Wise. Because you would have said it whether I told you the truth first or not, Marcus said. Your kind doesn't listen to coalition liaison. You listen to power. So I let you show your court exactly what you thought of humanity, and then I showed you exactly how wrong that was. Everyone in this room just watched their queen humiliate a man who could have ended this peacefully with a single data chip 40 minutes earlier, and watched that same man choose not to use it as a weapon. He held out the chip. This is still a courtesy, Your Majesty, not a demand. What you do with it is your choice. But I'd start by grounding every Keshrai wing vessel and opening an honest channel with the coalition fleet at your border, because they have orders to fire if they don't hear from your government by tomorrow evening. And I am not interested in flying back out there to explain why 48 hours turned into a funeral. The Queen took the chip. Her fingers, Marcus noted, were no longer entirely steady. Minister Drask, she said without looking away from Marcus. Open a channel to the coalition fleet commander immediately, and recall every Keshrai vessel to dock for full inspection. At once, Your Majesty. She was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus the way a general studies a battlefield. She's just realized she misread from the start. You said you lost your sister's convoy to raiders my people armed, she said finally. And yet you came here to prevent a war on my behalf, not to demand one. I didn't come here on your behalf, Marcus said. I came here so 11 more people don't become a statistic, and so my sister's convoy isn't the reason 100,000 of your people die in an orbital bombardment. Those two things aren't about you at all, Your Majesty. They never were. 3 weeks later, the Keshrai Wing's command structure was dissolved. 7 officers, including its commanding admiral, were arrested on charges of arming an outlawed raiding faction for personal profit. The Veltharan Dominion issued a formal, unprecedented public apology to the Earth Defense Coalition, the first such apology in the Dominion's 400-year history, and opened a joint task force with coalition forces to hunt down the remaining raiders along the shared border. Marcus Reyes never asked for credit. His report on the incident, filed with characteristic brevity, described the outcome as a successful de-escalation resulting in improved bilateral security cooperation. It did not mention the throne room, the Queen's fury, or the words, worthless peasant. But word travels in courts the way it never quite does anywhere else. And within a season, the story of the human who had stood unarmed before Queen Ashevra Kelnir absorbed her contempt without flinching, and then quietly saved her kingdom from a war of her own court's making, had spread through every noble house in the Dominion. Some versions said he had smiled the entire time. Some said his eyes had never left the Queen. All versions agreed on one thing, that when the Queen had called him beneath the dust on her boots, he had let her finish, and then he had shown her exactly how far beneath her he actually was, by choosing, when he held every card, not to burn her kingdom to the ground. Queen Ashevra requested one more private audience with him before he returned home. This time, there was no throne room, no court, no 300 watching nobles. I misjudged you, she said simply, without preamble, without the crown she usually wore. In 80 years, no one has stood in my court and refused to kneel while holding my kingdom's fate in his hands. I called you worthless. I was wrong, and I will not pretend otherwise. You didn't know, Marcus said. That's not an insult, Your Majesty. That's just what happens before people learn. What would you have done, she asked, if I had ordered my guards to kill you before you spoke? You said the fleet would fire regardless. They would have, Marcus said. I'd have been dead, and your kingdom would have burned anyway. 40 hours later, exactly as scheduled. I gambled that you were smart enough to let me finish talking before you decided to have me execute. Turns out I was right. The Queen studied him for a long moment. This quiet, unassuming human who had walked into her court with nothing but a data chip and the patience to let her make a fool of herself before he corrected her. The Dominion has never had a human ambassador, she said. I would like to change that, formally, with rank equal to any noble in my court. Marcus considered it. then shook his head with something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "I'm not an ambassador, Your Majesty. I'm a mechanic who got good at surviving. Send someone with actual diplomatic training for that job. I've got a convoy route to check on. The same one my sister was flying 6 years ago. Some of us just came home from it. I'd like to make sure the rest of them get to." He left the Dominion's capital the next morning, on the same modest gray shuttle he'd arrived in, without ceremony, without escort, without a single decoration on his uniform. Queen Ashevra watched his depart from her palace balcony, and for the first time in 80 years of rule, felt something that was not quite shame and not quite respect, but sat somewhere honest in the space between them. Beneath the dust on her boots, she thought, she would not make that mistake again, not because she feared him, but because she had finally understood what her entire court had missed in that throne room. That the quietest people in the room are very often the ones who have already survived the worst thing that will ever happen to them, and have chosen afterward to be kind anyway.